Good morning, beautiful friends. So today I'm playing with this sunflower, and I've drawn it out here. As always, I draw it a little bit darker. I will go over it with my little kneaded eraser, which looks like it rolled through some paint here. Anyways, I will go through that and just lighten up the lines a little bit. Since I'm going to be using some yellow, the pencil lines might show through. And I'm working on my Artisto, let's see, 9x12 paper. As you know, I tested out all my colors here on my little Artisto pad. I love these. Recommend them to all my beginners. If you don't want to hear about the supplies, you can just mute me or go forward. But I think this is so valuable for beginners. You can also keep them all in these little journals and label them. And then I refer back to them all the time. So these were some leaves I practice. These were the washes. And I can refer back to these at any time and kind of remind myself what I did. So I love these. And if you do want to give them out, they are perforated, but they're so handy. I have piles and piles of these labeled. And the texture on them is great. If you want something that's 100% cotton, I use the MEEDEN, and basically I use the MEEDEN when I'm going to really be doing some wet and wet, because it's a block. So you can really get them wet and you don't have to worry about taping down your paper. So I love those as well. But anyway, back to our drawing. Let's see here. Sorry for that if that camera is shaking. Let me just lighten all this up. If I knew how to edit, I could speed through this, but haven't quite gotten that far yet, you guys. I promise this year I'm going to work on that. Okay, and then today I have already sprayed my paints, but I'll give them one more quick little spray. I'm just using my MeiLang palette because I love all their colors. And guys, I'm a lazy painter, and to be honest, I think these are so great for beginners because you don't have to think about mixing your colors when you're a beginner, and it gives you all these light greens and dark greens and beautiful. I love their pinks and purples. They are so beautiful. Their blues, all their browns. You get so many great colors. And actually, I might mention, because I got on today to purchase something, and I noticed their smaller palette, which is the same as the other one, it just doesn't have the metallics, was on sale for like $16, $17, you guys. Of course, if you're watching this video in the future, that won't be there. And I've got my Dugato brush here, another good beginner set. You get 10 for $11, but I think I'm going, use any round brush you have. I'm going to use my 8 Princeton Velvet Touch, which I love because it's got that short handle and this great velvety feel. So that's what I'm going to be using today. But you can use your Dugatos if you're not quite ready to invest in a Princeton. You can use whatever brush you want. I've also got the Neptune here, which is just a little softer, holds more water. So I will keep that here. But I'm going to start off with my round Velvet Touch. It's kind of my go-to since college days. Okay, so hopefully you got to watch my tutorial yesterday on creating the washes, because that's what I'm going to be using as a technique with my petals. And that's kind of going to be my approach today. Make sure you have your clean water, your rinse water, so wash water, rinse water, and I love the MEEDEN water well because I have knocked over way too many plastic cups and things, and so I really like that water well. But important to wash and rinse because you don't want to carry over your color into the next color. So I think my paints are activated now, and I'm going to start with my petals. Just going in, I always kind of start with a lighter wash because you can always go darker with watercolors. So I'm going into my cad yellow, going to tap off, as you see me do a lot. And let's just start. So I'm going to go from the tip of my petals down, and then rinse my brush, scrape it off. And just like the wash yesterday, and I keep rinsing and tapping off my brush, rinse, so I can get that wonderful, wonderful wash here. Isn't that lovely? That's kind of what we went into yesterday. And I also talked about the importance of doing this while it's wet. I didn't give my palette here a squirt, so it's a little dry. And then I'm going to go in here and just start adding some orange, rinse, damp, and pulling that up. If you get that little bloom, you can just tap off your brush. And then I'm going to get even a little bit darker in here with a tiny bit of my sepia. I love that sepia brown color because it has some orangey type of color in it. So it goes well with daisies. And then let's just, or I'm going to, you can do how you like. Wash. Oop, drop some there. I love working with a damp brush. It's just, to me, so much easier to control. Go in again with a little bit of orange. Okay. And there we've got a beautiful blend. You can always go in with that damp brush and clean up some of those lines. And there you go. Okay, let's go on to our next. So I'm going into my yellow, tap, tap, tap. I know, you're probably so tired of hearing me say that, aren't you? Tap, tap, tap. You're gonna hear that in your head though, and you're either going to hate me or you're gonna remember it. Going in, pulling down that wash, rinse, down again. So just like in the wash, I'm pulling the color down with a clean, damp brush. Then go in with my orange and start blending that in with my yellow. And you get that beautiful blend. Then just a tiny bit of that brown down here. Now that's a lot, so I'm gonna wash, tap off, and start blending that into the orange. Add just a tiny bit of that orange. There we go. All right. I'm just kind of playing with it while it's wet here. And you can leave or lift some white spaces if you really want to. You know, I'm big on those. And then let's do this petal down here. Now, typically in a wash, you're not leaving white spaces, but you can. So I just left some white space right there. Go in now with my orange. Start blending it up into that yellow. Hopefully you can see that, how it's blending. Maybe a tiny bit of that brown. And you can do these different. So this one, I've got a little bit more brown, which is totally fine. Sometimes too, I will blow on these to get a little bit more movement. I'm gonna add some water to that. But then I'm tapping off. So whatever water and pigment I pick up in here, I'm still only using a damp brush. Blending that up. There we go. And we just keep moving on. Again, if I knew how to edit, I would just fast forward. So if you want to fast forward through this versus watching me paint all of these, you can certainly do that. Rinse my brush and spread it down. There we go. Some of that orange now, and I'm using a little more intense colors in some areas because I did leave some white space there, by the way, because I'm trying to vary my colors a little bit. So some might have a little bit more brown or orange depending. Just clean up those lines a little bit. Tiny bit more orange. Or I might just carry some of that orange, blending it up into the petal a little bit more. And if you notice, I'm not working on petals right next to each other because I don't get too worried. Look at all these little splatters I have. Because I don't necessarily want those to blend. Now this one, I think I'm gonna go start from the base of the petal. So I don't know if you can see that, but I didn't tap off my brush enough. So I got a little bit of a puddle there, which I don't like working that way. Rinse my brush, wash my brush rather, pull it down. And now I'm gonna go from the outer petal, just to give this a little variation from petal to petal. And then carry that up, blending these together in that beautiful variegated wash. And maybe just a little brown at the tip, maybe even some brown in here. But now I want to clean those lines up a little. And I'm working quite fast here because if you're working wet and wet, you don't want to start going in there. When you're working on one element, you want them to be the same wetness. Otherwise you can get some crazy blooms and things. So if you notice, I'm laying down a wash first, but then I am working wet and wet as well. Adding in, but I'm really creating this beautiful variegated wash. So I'm going to go from the outer in again, right here. Pulling it down, creating a lighter wash as it goes down. And then the orange at the bottom here. Now that's a little bit too much. So I just tap off my brush and using the tip of my brush, I pick some of that up. And blending it in with the yellow, maybe a tiny bit of that brown. So these variegated washes are so beautiful. Let's do this one here. Tap off my brush. And pulling it down just like we did in our wash. I tap my brush off a lot, as you notice. I've even had some of you ask me, because that's kind of a little habit I have. You know, I'm sure you find those quirky little things that you do. And then I'm gonna add a little brown on the edge here because it's just tucked behind this petal a bit. In. So I am starting with the wash that we practiced yesterday, but as you see, I'm also working a little wet and wet. So I get that base kind of glaze, and normally with glazes I would let each glaze and layer dry, but here I kind of do a wash, a light wash over the entire leaf, and then I go in and start, oops, sorry, we want to start up here. That was our first one. Then I go in and I lay down some more. Okay, so let's go here. I think for these in the back, I'm going to add just a touch of yellow ochre. Look how pretty that water is too, by the way. So be careful with the yellow ochre because boy, it is really, really powerful. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that wet, tap off my brush, and maybe mix it with a little cad yellow right here. Nope. If you notice, haven't really been rinsing my brush because I'm okay with carrying some of, they're all kind of right next to each other on the color wheel. So I don't mind blending those a bit. Those colors, yellows and browns and oranges. Tap my brush off. And now let's go into, let's see, let's go into this one here. So it's still pretty yellow. I'm gonna grab just a tiny bit more of that yellow ochre. I want it to have a little bit, yeah, there, warmer feel. Rinse my brush, start pulling it down like in our washes. There we go. And I have got some white space in there. There we go. And then into the bottom here with a little bit warmer orange. So I mixed a little brown and a little orange. Yeah, I definitely tap my brush a lot. So I have a little orange and red in here because it's behind that petal. I'm gonna do the same with a lot of these. Pick up some of that yellow and ochre, and let's go from the bottom up. Keep going till it gets lighter and lighter. That variegated wash. And then I might tap in, smooth it out, and go. This is where now I work wet and wet. A little bit of that orange and that brown. And just go along the side here. Before this gets too dry, working rather quickly. And there you go. I'm trying to make them all different. And then let's do this one here. So I'll pick up some of that yellow. Maybe I'll do a little combo of yellow and some orange, because I want all my petals to be a little bit different. Creating that wash. So they don't all look the same. Now some yellow ochre. And blend that in. Go. Now I see that kind of went into the little petal next to it, so I just picked some of that up, and I'm just going to keep going. Ooh, now that is a real yellow ochre. I like that. Wash my brush, pull it out. Here's the wash that we practiced yesterday, damp and damp. I think I might leave that one a light color. Go in here. Now that's pretty orange. So, oop, I am a sloppy painter, guys. And pull that out. There we go. Yeah, I like the lighter leaves. You can use a lighter value. But vary your colors and keep it real interesting. And maybe a tiny bit of orange. So with that glaze or wash that you hopefully practiced yesterday, you're creating a good base. Let's go to this one here, and I'm gonna make that one a little bit more golder color. Maybe even a tiny bit of brown. Tap off. Ooh, I like that color. That's the sepia and the brown. Rinse my brush. Create that wash. I'm not even going in and picking up more water. I'm just pulling it out with a damp brush. There we go. I'm going to do the same with this one here, same type of color. Some of that sepia and yellow ochre, because they're kind of in the background there. Rinse my brush, tap it off again. So, like I said, I'm not even picking up more water, I'm just pulling it out. And let's see if we can do a petal over here. You definitely want to make sure those, unless you're going for that real washy blended look. Now, because these petals are golder, I'm going to try and make this just a little different hue. So I'm playing a little bit with some of the browns, sepias, pulling it down like that. I think I'm going to just leave that like that and go on to the next one right here. Maybe go from the dark to light in there. So really have fun with these colors. I'm going to start the orange here. And I am referring to this as a wash because I feel like I'm lightening and laying down a wash on the entire petal. So that's why I refer to it as a wash, but then adding in colors. This one's tucked a little behind, so I'm just going to do some of that. And here's one that's really just peeking out. So I'm gonna make that one a little darker using my gold or yellow ochre. And you could even use a tiny bit of blue. There we go. Ooh. Okay. And by the way, I had a couple little mistakes, but I'm not leaving them. I don't know if you can see those. They're just little, probably where I touched with my hand, and I'm gonna leave them because they kind of look cool, I think. So here's another petal that's behind these. So I will use a little more gold or yellow ochre. I always refer to it as gold. And maybe some brown in there. Pick up some of that brown. Now I've kind of got a puddle there, so I'm just gonna lift some of that out. There we go. And just almost creating like a double wash. So I did a wash and then I kind of did I'd refer to it more as a glaze. over my original wash. And then here's another petal in the background, so I will also do that one with my yellow ochre and brown. And creating that wash. Here's another one. There we go. Maybe just add the tiniest bit of orange to that. And we got another one here. So I'm just doing all these little ones peeking out. In the back in those brown colors. Now I can always go back in. See, I've got some more orange right there. And glaze over these and make them darker if I want. That's always an option. Picking up some of my paint I tapped off. Creating that wash. I'm gonna lift a little bit of that off because I went out of the lines. There we go. Oh, and I missed one big petal here. So I'll pick some paint up, tap off, and go on in there. Yeah, it's so interesting because while I teach you guys, I try to go through my thinking process for you. And I notice all the little kind of interesting things that I do that I probably would have never paid much attention to. But because I'm trying to share my thinking process and why I do things, I notice I do some funny little things. One of you had mentioned I tap off on my towel a lot. And I was like, oh, I guess I do. Okay, so we're basically done with that. Now I'm gonna go into the center. And I don't know if you can see, but I've got a little circle here. Then I did these little dots. And I think you could do that two ways. The way I always did it in the past is I would do a glaze. So let's just do a glaze in the center. Like so. And then I might add in just a tiny bit of Prussian, or Payne's Gray, sorry, Payne's Gray, a very light, because that color can get away from you. So tapping off and just creating some shadows in there. And then in the middle, I'm gonna do more of a brown and let those kind of merge together. But I also left some white in there. And now what I'll do, so there's a little bit of glazing. Now what I'll do is there's two ways you can do this. I'm gonna do them both, although normally I would only use one. Use the tip of your brush and tap in there. And what happens is it'll create little dots. Just for some, it'll look like texture. And then I'm also, it's kind of hard to see, but it creates a little bit of texture. The other thing I'm gonna do, because I have Q-tips sitting here from Christmas, is I'm gonna go in with a very washy Q-tip and pick up some gold and different colors, that Payne's Gray, and go in. Now that wasn't wet enough, so let me grab a little bit more. And just use the tip of my brush, or tip of my Q-tip, and make some little dots here. There you go. Now I could go in there with some gold too, maybe even mix. I don't, you know what though, I don't want to mix my Payne's gray with gold because it'll probably turn green. So I'll use the gold. There we go. And it just creates kind of a fun, unique look. I'm gonna go in and grab a little bit more of that Payne's gray, maybe some of that brown, and go around just some of the edges. What I like about using the Q-tip too is it really creates an organic feel. So there you go. I think that's kind of cool. It's kind of a cool look. Now let's go in and add our stem here. I'm gonna go in first with probably a tree green, a mix of tree green and olive green. Not too dark though. Actually, I want more of the tree green in there. And just do a light wash on the stem. You can leave some white in there. Go all the way down, but while it's wet, I want to go into that with some darker. I've got a dark olive green here. Actually, this is Hooker's green, I think, but that's fine. I can pick up some olive green, and we can just play with all these colors. Now, if it already dried and it's not spreading, just go in and wash and rinse your brush. And just go touching barely into the edge of that and let it spread. I might even lift some of that out. And there you go. Actually, sunflower stems are a little thicker than that, so we can even widen that a bit. Grab some of my olive green. I'm gonna make it just a little thicker because sunflower stems, or the ones I've had on my desk, are pretty hardy. And there you go. I'm gonna go ahead and start on the little bud here because I wanna finish the flowers before I go into doing some little lines here. And these, I'm gonna use a brush stroke to create the petal. So pushing, opening the belly of my brush, go in and do all of these little, might mix my paint up a little bit. See that cat or that yellow ochre is really vibrant, so make sure you kind of tap some of that off or dilute it a bit. And I'm just using a brush stroke here, which meaning I'm using the tip of my brush and pushing into my brush to open the belly to get that thicker line. Now, while it's wet, I will go in and tap in with maybe a tiny bit of gold or even a little orange, but tap off to get some of that out. And just organically lay my brush down, get some of those pretty wet and wet blends. I'm just really laying down my brush with some of that color. And then I'm going to go in here with my green. I'm going to use my tree green here. And this actually has a little bit of that lighter green that's in the MeiLang palette. Don't want too much water on my brush. And go in and create all these little green petals coming out. I'm varying my colors a little bit. So I used the light green, and now I'm adding in some of the darker green. Point press to get some of those wider areas. There we go. Okay, let's go ahead and do our stem. Bring that down, and while it's wet, I will go in there and add in some of my darker green. I even added a little hooker's green to that, but tap off my brush and just go in along that edge, maybe even, look how pretty that is. So again, I'm using those brush strokes of the tip of my brush like this. Let me show you. So for those petals, I'm using light pressure tip, compound stroke, tip of my brush, and then I start widening out, pushing into the belly of my brush, and then picking up again to have that thinner line. So I don't want to do a whole lot with these petals. Some smaller ones, and you can always, again, you can always glaze over those, creating a couple darker ones. Don't like that orange, so I'm going to clean my brush and lift some of that out. I think I'll pick up maybe a little bit more my cad yellow. And add a few more of those touches in just to brighten it up a bit. And there we go. I've got a little wiggly leaf out here, but I'm going to do this leaf first because I am right-handed, so I want to work right or left to right. So I've got quite a bit of water in my brush this time because I'm covering a large area, and I'm going to go over that with my sap or tree green. And let's just cover the entire, so I'm glazing over, creating a wash, wet on dry, for that entire leaf. And now I'm going to let it dry a bit, but I will go in wet just to the bottom here. And I'm going to be darkening the inside of the leaf. So just laying down a little bit of that foundation. Now I'm going to go to this little wiggly leaf coming off of the bud. Let's pick up some of our light MeiLang. Tip of my brush, opening, pushing into the belly, wiggle, 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 and to the point. Other side, wiggle, wiggle. I want that to be a little bit darker. Let me get some of my olive. There we go. And you can go along that if you want it to blend a little bit more. And then we've got one more leaf here, so let's get that one in there. My tree or sap green. That's a little bit dark, but we've got a large area to cover here. So, oop, that was a lot of water, guys. Don't do that. I'll have to lift that out right now. So, oops, this is how you fix it. Go in the dry brush and just pick it up. Then you can go in there again and lay it down again. I did leave some white space in there. Just gonna lift a little bit of that out too. And while this is wet, I will go in with a little bit of my darker green and create a little vein. I'm not doing a solid line. I'm kind of lifting and creating a broken line there. I might even go in there with a tiny bit of this cad yellow and create some fun little highlights and such. There we go. Okay, so I quite like this. I think what I'll do on to make this more interesting now is I will go in with some of my Payne's Gray I've got here, which actually is a little bit mixed with my brown. And I'm going to go in around the lower edge here and just dot in some little shadowy type areas. There we go. I love using a little bit of Payne's Gray or blue in there. I think that's so pretty. And if you want to take a very thin brush, like a fine liner, let's see, what is this one? This is a Princeton Heritage Round, but a number 2. You could probably do it with your bigger brushes, but you'd have to have a very light touch. And I'm just gonna go in and create a couple little fine lines, use some of my gold and my brown, but pretty wet. So I've got maybe a 80% water, 20% pigment. And just create these little lines, very light touch. Like that, just creates a little bit of interest. And I'm not doing every single flower petal. That's a little bit wet. Maybe in here. Just create some interest there. Let's turn our page so I don't stick our paper so I don't stick my hand in there. Keep going around my page. And that just makes it kind of interesting. I'm going to go in to the center here and maybe just draw little squigglies. Adding in some different colors. Some yellows, and there we go. Maybe we could do a little bit of those veins in our little bud there. I don't usually use detail or fine liners. This is a 2 round. Actually kind of like this. I've been trying some new things lately because I typically paint the same way for years now. And it's really been fun trying some fun different things. Okay, I like that. I'm going to now, since this is dry, go in there and add, I think I will make the back petal. No, I think I'm gonna do the front of this petal a darker value. So I'm gonna pick up some olivey green here and my sap green. But I've got 80-20, 80 pigment, 20 water. There. Tap off, because I don't want to go onto my sheet with that. And let's darken this front petal. I originally was going to make it lighter, but in looking at it, I'm feeling, yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted to instead make it dark on the outside of the petal. There we go. I might even put a glaze of darker pigment over this stem underneath, just to show it might be shadowed a bit. Tap off. And there we go. So I quite like that. I like that look. I'm gonna darken this just a tiny bit so you can distinguish between that back and the front. And then I might put another glaze. Now you could really stop here, but I love glazes. So I'm constantly adding glazes to things. I think I wanna darken this a little bit. There we go. Just adding in little details. Sometimes those little details make all the difference. Like that. They can completely take your painting and you add in some glazes and things to a different level. Now you could very much just stop here. I'm going to play and glaze a couple layers maybe in here. So I think I'll get some orange on my brush. Ooh, boy, that was thick. I need a lot of water there. And my brush is really full now, so I'm tapping off, and look at all that liquid that came off. I'm going to add a little bit of that color too. And then tap off. And this is either gonna ruin this or it's gonna make it gorgeous, guys. So number one, I'll go on this one here. Just add some fun depth, and then I think I will go on this back petal here and just glaze it. So point, press. Yeah, I like that. Tap off. This one, point, press, and I'm kind of using the side of my brush. And just going in and creating some fun glazes with some of these. Don't want to stick my hand in those. Point, side of my brush. And this is really where I just enjoy watercolors so much, because you can get this layering that creates the most unique shades, because you're going over other colors. So you're getting the color you're putting down, but it kind of changes with whatever color you put underneath. Now I feel like I want to go in on this and darken it a bit because this little petal sticking out is kind of in the background. Maybe even a little brown. Like that. So see how that just kind of pops and all of a sudden pulls out something. So let's glaze this one. Point, press. We'll maybe do this one with a little yellow. So I'm putting that yellow in my palette, adding water because cad yellow is vibrant, but I'm not going from that puddle to my painting. I'm tapping a lot of that liquid off. And then let me turn this so I don't stick my hand in there. Point, side of brush, and down. Look at that layering. That is, to me, the beauty of watercolors, that beautiful glazing, yet it allows the paint underneath to really shine. So I'm just picking some of the petals that were in front and trying not to touch my leaves that are wet. Now you could have just left this how it was. Point, use the side of my brush, need a little bit more. Point, side of my brush, maybe add a little orange to that. And look at how that just changes. I'm going along the side of that with some water just to soften out that line. But look at what a difference that can make. And you could just keep going and keep going and keep going. Now, another touch I want to do that I love doing with sunflowers is I've got some of this Winsor Newton zinc white gouache, and I'm going to go into the tube and just put some on the tip of my brush and watch what this does. It really makes a difference. You could do this if you had a white pen too, which I have, but not right in front of me. Let's see if it might be quicker to use the tip of my brush. I envisioned that working a lot better. So this is a gouache, by the way. Yeah, this works better. And just creating a little bit of white spots, just for some interest. And look how pretty. So again, you may just be done and don't even have to watch the rest of this, but I tend to keep playing and working with those layers that just develop so much interest that I love. I'm going to go just a shade darker in that background, and let's see what that kind of does. And sometimes, honestly, I think, oh, I should have just left that alone. Point, press, there we go. Look how pretty. I think this is just lovely. I feel like I need to stop or I'm going to overwork it. I'm just going to do a couple more dots here. But layering to me is just key to creating so much beauty, because the more you layer, you just keep getting these really fun, unique colors when the layers build on top of each other. And remember that watercolors dry lighter, unlike gouache, which is the opposite. So a lot of times I feel I need to go back in and add a little bit more, because my first layer, maybe dried too lightly. Just gonna go in here, add Add some little dots around the edges. There we go. All right, you guys, well, I think I better stop here, and I hope this had some good things in here for you. You could really keep going like I might, and just more glazes and more glazes, and it just keeps building in layers. You want to be a little careful because your paintings, if you overwork them, can get muddy. So I say 3, maybe 4 glazes max. I typically work 2 or 3. If I go any more than that, it just tends to look a little overworked. So I hope you give this a try. I will put this drawing on the community page, or you can email me for it, debbiewalkerart@gmail.com. And you can use that drawing to kind of guide you. And I'll get my links for any of these, the Dugatos, the Princetons, you know, but any round brush you've got will do. And I will link this paper as well. All right, everybody, thank you. I hope you had fun with that.